All right. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's alumni speaker series, Wine Pairing 101, featuring Gordon Sullivan, class of 73, and Logan Sweet, class of 2015. I am Becky Bramer, and I'm the Assistant Vice President for Advancement and a member of SU's class of 1992. We will have time for questions following the presentation, and we'll do our best to get to all of them, including those that were submitted ahead of time. But during the presentation, if you have additional questions, you can submit them in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. First, I want to acknowledge a few SU faculty and staff who are in attendance. We have President Jonathan Green and First Lady Lynn Buck, Vice President for Advancement, Melissa Kimura. From the staff, we have Kim Andretta, Liz Hahn, Chris Markle, Susie Schaefer, Jennifer Spots, and Jody Swartz. And we also welcome from the Board of Trustees, Meg France and Tony Tamarazzo. So to introduce Gordon and to serve as tonight's moderator, we welcome Logan Sweet. Logan is the Associate Director of Advancement Communications. An SU alumnus and employee, Logan found a passion for wine while working in the Finger Lakes American viticultural area in New York. His connection to several growers and winemakers in the Seneca Lake viticultural area led to his interest in small-scale producers and up-and-coming American wine regions. I'll turn it over to you, Logan.
Thank you, Becky. And it is really my pleasure, I just want to say to the people on this call, to be speaking with Gordon Sullivan. Unlike Gordon, I really have no formal training or formal education in wine other than what Becky has mentioned and the fact that I was lucky enough to work with several producers, but Gordon has had an amazing career, and so it's a real treat for me to be able to speak with him tonight. He's worked in the industry for 47 years. He has held positions that have ranged from chief sommelier to fine wine consultant and luxury brand manager for one of the country's largest distributors of wine and spirits. And he is also the author of a soon-to-be published book. So Gordon, thank you so much for speaking with me today. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with everyone who's on this call. And as we get started here, I'm wondering if you can kind of tell us a little bit about your journey and kind of, what got you interested in wine and what's your career looked like?
Very good. Well, thank you, Logan. And good evening, everybody. I didn't know we had this many winos at Susquehanna, but welcome to all of you. We're going to have a fun evening tonight. It will be education. It will be fun. It will be talk about Thanksgiving, and we have some slides that you'll be able to view during the presentation, but and then there will be question and answers at the end. So I, as you know, graduated from Susquehanna in 1973. I feel like a grandfather when I saw some of the people on this call and when they graduated, but yeah, so it was a long time ago, but as soon as I graduated, I worked up in Maine, which I had done for about 3 or 4 years. And then, having my degree in economics and international finance from Susquehanna, I jumped on a sailboat from Ogunquit, Maine. And the owner said he was taking the 50-foot sailboat down to Palm Beach, Florida. Now, I never heard of Palm Beach, Florida, but it sounded pretty exotic. So I said, sure, I'll crew on it. So we only had 4 people on board, and it was about a 2-week trek. And we stopped at Annapolis and Newport and Cape Fear, and then finally into Palm Beach. And the boat was docked within walking distance to the Breakers Hotel. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life, but I had tended bar, so I could actually walk over to the Breakers. The Breakers is one of the finest hotels in America. And I was hired on that first day as a banquet bartender. And I did that for 1 season, but I saw a lot of these older French gentlemen walking around with a tasting cup around their neck and a large wine list and several different glass types. And I said to myself, I want to do that. So after my first year in the bar end of the Breakers, I switched over to the wine department. And with that, it was a little bit of, you start as a glass boy, no political correctness back then, but I prepared the dining rooms, and we had several dining rooms with stemware for the night. So when the somms came in, they would sell, and then, you know, I would help top off the glasses. So I did that glass boy for about 4 or 5 months, and then I switched into banquet wine steward, then eventually dining room wine steward, and I eventually was promoted to the chef sommelier, or chief wine steward at the hotel. And I had probably 9 sommeliers working for me, and had a wonderful time. We probably had a 450 item wine list. And back in the mid 70s, early mid 70s, that was a very large wine list. Burns Steakhouse in Tampa had a large one. Las Vegas had a few places that did well, but the Breakers really was one of the first, and they also had a designated wine department. So after about 4.5 years at the Breakers, I knew I wanted to keep growing my wine expertise. So I applied with a supplier that I'd known well at the Breakers. I did all the ordering and put the wine list together. And that at the time was called Southern Wine and Spirits. And since then, we have morphed into by far the largest distributor in the country. We're based in Miami, where I started, and now we're in 44 states around the country. So I started out with a very large geographical area up to Vero Beach in the north and West Palm Beach in the south. And I did that for several years until I became the luxury wine brands manager. I've always sold, but I really spent almost my entire career educating people. If I would compose a wine list for a restaurant or hotel, I would present it, and then I would teach the servers and the management team how to, first of all, pronounce wine, how to talk about food wine affinities, just helping guide their guests through the mysterious category of wine, as a lot of people felt. So I've been in education pretty much the whole time. And it's been a very, very great career. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I did retire about 1.5 years ago. And as Logan said, I've done a few things since then. I've opened up a wine consulting business where I contact hotels again, restaurants, private clubs. That's sort of my area of expertise. But I also deal with retailers as well that want to increase their wine professionalism. So I opened up the consulting business, which is doing very well. I developed an in-bottle wine aerator, which is patented to 2 areas. It can be winery insertion, where it will go under a screw cap and then is sent out to market. We're in the novice stages of this company, but it's very far along. I've been working on it for 6 years. And then it will also have an aftermarket piece where when you buy something at home, you can remove the cork or the screw cap and then insert the aerator. So what it does is it creates aeration, which is the friend of wine, and it makes it more palatable in the desire in which the winemaker had intended. So that, and then I also took about 7 or 8 months to write a wine book. It's not published yet, but I do have the publisher working very closely with me on it. The thrust of the book will be wine education, but not in the traditional sense. Those of you on the call that you may have some large wine books at home. You may have Kevin Zraly's book. You may have the Wine Folly book. You may get the Wine Spectator or the Wine Enthusiast. There's some great publications out there, but I just saw that the next generation doesn't want to read these large books, and I've got 250 of them in my office. So I did a wine question and answer book, and it's probably in the vicinity of 3,000 questions in 62 chapters. And it's probably in the vicinity of 300 pages. So I'm looking for spring release if all goes well. Again, based on the supply chains and the ability for publishers to buckle down a little bit. So believe me, retirement is what I want to do, but it's at my pace, and I'm loving every minute of it. So thank you, Logan.
Yeah, thank you, Gordon. So, this is a wine webinar. I'm having a glass as we speak. I'm having one of my favorites, which is a 2015 Ravines Dry Riesling from the Finger Lakes up on Seneca Lake. It's a beautiful wine. I think that it's just got a really lovely floral nose. Tasting notes of pear and apple and white peach. A lot of Finger Lakes wines, a lot of Finger Lakes whites tend to be very acidic. And this one is also quite acidic, but with 6 years of age, that's starting to mellow out a little bit. And it's really letting these really, beautiful mineral notes come through. And it's just one of my favorites. And I'm happy to be drinking it as we talk. And I'm just wondering, what are you drinking tonight?
Gordon, I am drinking let me show you. I am a Burgundy fanatic. Burgundy is the most complex area in France, and some would say the world. I think Germany would be a close second, but I've been studying Burgundy for my entire career, and I realize I still don't know everything. Nobody does. But the wine is a Grand Cru white Burgundy called Clio Betal Moache. So it's from Burgundy, 100% Chardonnay, and this is the 2003 vintage. So I have a large collection of wine, and those of you that are buying wine, put some of it away if you're buying cases or half cases. See what the flavor profile is the first time you open it. And if you feel that it needs a little aging time, please don't hesitate to do that, because wine, we have a tendency in America to drink our wines very quickly after purchase. And some of them are produced for that, but others are produced that they will improve over time. The nuances will come across in a very pleasurable way. So please be patient with some of the wines if you can. Not everybody can. And I want to interject one more thing at this point, if I may, Logan.
Of course.
In my glass, or in my wine glass that I'm featuring tonight, I'm a firm believer, and I'm not saying you need a stemware for every wine that you're drinking, but there is an Austrian producer called Riedel, and I know George Riedel very well. This family has been in, I think this is the 11th generation. They didn't make wine glasses the whole time, but the last 40 years, they've really concentrated on it. So I think sometimes if you are putting the wine in the wrong glass, it's doing it a disservice. I think the key here is to not get a bunch of glasses. They have all purpose. This is a Grand Cru white Burgundy glass from Riedel. But what most of you see, I brought another one. This is a traditional Bordeaux glass, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, any of the big reds, this large bowl, which allows swirling. But your stemware, you're doing an injustice if you're not providing yourself with proper stemware. So please spend a little, it's $5, $6 a stem. If you're looking, they have many series of wine glasses, but it really, really does make a difference.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great point to make, Gordon. The proper stemware allows the wine to drink the way that the winemaker intends for it to be drank, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think that lends itself to this transition to what should we consider as wine drinkers when we are drinking wine? What should we look for in flavor profile and aroma? Can you walk us through that a little bit, please?
Certainly. If you're learning, I don't know where you all are. I think there's about 70 people on the call here, and you're all at different levels with your expertise, professionalism, enjoyment. We're not here to make it complicated. I've spent my entire career simplifying things because I think too many people, you're making a mistake by having that wine with that food. And that to me is not accurate. I think you drink what you like, but here's a few key terms that you may or may not know, but they're important when you're in discussions. When Thanksgiving coming, you'll have a lot of family over, hopefully, and friends. So these things may or may not come up, but they come up if you are attending a wine tasting at your local wine shop or liquor store or restaurant or hotel, whatever. The first one is acidity. And acidity is something that is in every wine. If we look at a grape when it's maturing, a very small grape, at harvest time, it's usually around 25, 23, 25% sugar. The rest is acid, and there's other things in there, but primarily acidity. And acidity keeps wine at attention. Acidity is something that does more than probably anything else in the glass, and that allows you to essentially have a bite of food. And if you're drinking something with high acidity, like Logan's Riesling is, and my Clio Rosé is, this acts as a palate cleanser. So if you have a bite of food and you enjoy that, and you are drinking a wine that's high in acid or acidity in this case, it actually cleanses the palate so that that next bite of food will taste as good as the first bite of food. And I think that's important. If we sometimes, I'm not against the distilled spirits industry, but sometimes with Scotch or with a bourbon or whatever you're drinking, that kind of numbs the palate, but wine awakens the palate because of acidity, which is one of the reasons that fine wine complements fine dining. So that's the acidity, very important part, crisp, tart, clean, all of those refreshing aromatics that you get in Riesling, Chardonnay, red wines, obviously they all have acidity in them. So that's the palate cleansing ability factor. Aroma is something that has to do with when you smell wine. Now, there are actually two words we could use here. Aroma is the smell of a recently bottled wine, where the other term could be bouquet. And bouquet is something that comes from a bottle developed wine. In other words, my Clio Rosé, since the 2003 vintage, has developed a bouquet. So aroma is the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, the Riesling, the Pinot Grigio, the Pinot Gris, all these things are aroma, but that's essentially the smell of the wine. And there are many more smells than there are tastes. So that's something to consider when discussing the aromatics of wine, is what are you actually cataloging? And your nose will tell your brain what you should be tasting. Body is something that's more tactile. What impression is the wine making on the palate? So I am drinking a white Burgundy from a Grand Cru vineyard, richer, bolder, more powerful, where Logan is drinking a Riesling, which is cleaner, higher levels of acidity probably, and just a lighter bodied wine. So when you look at body, you can look at light bodied wines, medium bodied wines, and full bodied wines. And if it's still a little bit confusing to you, think about the dairy industry and think about the milk industry. The light bodied milk is skim milk. 2% milk is medium bodied milk, and full bodied milk would be, full milk, or what do they call it now? I haven't had it in years.
Whole milk.
Whole milk, yes, thank you, Logan. Whole milk is like cream if you haven't had it in a while. So they're all three milk products, but what impression are they making on the palate? And that could be referred to as the body of the milk or of the wine, it doesn't matter. Another commonality that people have sometimes a difficulty in discerning is the dryness level or the sweetness level. And what dry is that Logan and I are both drinking dry wines tonight. Dry wine sort of combines well with acidity that creates that cleanliness on the palate. So dryness you're looking for, it cleanses the palate before that next bite of food comes on. And so most of the wine produced today is dry or some version of dryness. The other one would be sweetness or sweet. And usually those are in the dessert wine category, which we will be discussing later tonight. But sweetness just means, wow, this is, and if you're a novice drinker, you want sweet wine because most Americans are brought up to with Coca-Cola and a lot of sweet things in the diet. So it's very easy to enjoy a white Zinfandel or a Riesling that is on the sweet side. But they're stylistic, and there's everything in between. There's bone dry, there's semi-dry, there's very sweet, semi-sweet. You know, there's all kinds of infinities between both of those classifications. The other thing that is a component in wine, of course, is the alcohol. And alcohol is produced by the fermentation process. Alcohol is wine actually is a very natural process that has been around for about 7,000 or 8,000 years. And you put grapes in a bucket, you will end up with alcohol. What happens, the yeast starts eating the sugar. If it ferments totally dry, you end up with a wine that is higher in alcohol. If your wine is sweeter, it has less alcohol. But there is an important consideration when discussing alcohol. You may find some Rieslings which are 10% alcohol, and then you will find another one that's 11% alcohol. It's very easy to dismiss that, oh, that's only 1 degree sweeter, but it's actually 10% sweeter. So when you're talking about alcohol levels, you've got to be aware that most alcohol is 12, 13, maybe 14%. And there's a big difference between 11 and 13, believe me. There's a big difference between 10 and 11.
My Riesling is 12.5, and I'm just.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah, I'm
That's
just curious.
okay. Very good.
What about your blend?
It doesn't show it on white Burgundy. I can tell you the alcohol is 14, but it really doesn't say anything about sweetness ever. So if it's high alcohol, his is 11, mine is 14. They're both dry. They're both high in alcohol. Okay. The last thing is tannin. Tannins are found in red wines, and there's 4 sources of tannin. They come from grape skins, grape seeds, grape stems, and then oak barrel, which may be fermented or at least aged in. So tannin is that mouth-puckering astringency that softens over time, and over time, tannins solidify into sediment. So sediment is over time, the tannins combine. I've spent my whole career in microbiology and biochemistry. So the tannin molecules combine and or polymerize, and then they drop out of solution. So over time, you will find sediment at the bottom of your bottle. Those are solidified tannins.
Thank you, Gordon.
Sure.
So all of these things obviously contribute to the experience that we as wine drinkers have when we are enjoying a glass of wine. And then that experience that we are having when we're having a glass also complements the food that we're eating with it. And so I'm wondering, now can you just kind of talk to us about how do the things that you've just discussed and defined, how and why do they complement the food that we are enjoying? And then what are some pairings that work really well? And then what would you recommend people consider when they are trying to choose wines to eat with a meal or to eat with a specific type of food?
Yeah, let's just do this first before we get into the Thanksgiving part. But, when you look at red wines, yes, they're higher in alcohol for the most part. They are more tannic, which we already talked about. There's higher levels of pigmentation. Pigmentation comes from the grape skin exclusively. So the smaller the grape, the larger percentage of pigmentation is going to be transformed from the skin and into the wine. So if you are having a red wine, and it could be a Cabernet Sauvignon from California, it could be a red Bordeaux, it could be a Northern Rhone, Syrah, whatever you're looking at, red wines like bold dishes because bold dishes mirror red wines. So your goal when seeking out wine and food, you want to try to keep the meal in balance. So red wines, bold dishes, that's an automatic. That's something that people, when you go to a steakhouse, you're going to eat a Cabernet Sauvignon with a T-bone steak or a beef Wellington or whatever it is. Big wines like big, bold flavors, especially meat. But it does work with cheeses as well. So that's the red wine. White wine's usually a little more delicate. So if you are having a fish course, so if you're in a gourmet dining situation where you may be having a crab cake at the beginning, or you may have a filet of sole Véronique for your entree. You want to have a white wine that works nicely with the delicate fish that you're serving. Now, there are some fish that aren't delicate, like salmon, that has a little bit of oiliness to it. And if you're blackening the salmon or grilling it, it adds another layer of complexity. So white wines work good with seafood, shellfish, poultry, veal, light pastas, salads, sandwiches, lunch. It's just, that's sort of where the white wine fits. And I live in Florida, so we drink a lot more white wines than the rest of the country. You guys up north are drinking red wine, especially as winter is going to be showing its face sooner rather than later. So the bottom line here is just a summation of the two is I will never tell anybody what they should drink or they have to drink. And the reason for that is everybody's biochemistry is so different. Everybody perceives wine differently. Everybody perceives food differently. Everybody's vocabulary. I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I love those bone dry white Zinfandels. Okay, that to them, it's a dry wine. So their vocabulary has to enter the equation. It does have residual sweetness to it, but in their eyes, it's a dry wine. So you got to get the starting point of how is this physiology of your brain working and how are you perceiving? There's a great book on neuroenology, which explains how there's so many things going on in the brain and how we perceive things. And to put food and wine together is a very, very difficult thing to do. So that's why I'm kind of against this very strict rule that some people use. And if you're doing it, fine, I will never question you from doing that. But it's something that eat what you want and drink what you want at the same time. That's what it's all about.
So moving to Thanksgiving, I really like what you said about not pigeonholing yourself and having a very specific wine with a very specific dish. But there are themes throughout a traditional Thanksgiving meal. You know, there are robust dishes, turkey, gravy, cauliflower. There are, you know, herbal sides, there are sweet sides, there's dessert. There's a lot of different things going on in a traditional Thanksgiving meal. And so, you know, that would lend itself to lots of different possible wine pairings. And so I'm thinking we can just take a couple of minutes to walk through what some of those possible pairings could be. But I think we'll start with bubbles because every great dinner party, every great gathering starts with a glass of a bubbly of whatever you as the drinker want to drink. And so could you kind of just walk us through what some of these classic styles of sparkling wine are?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Logan. Yeah, bubbles are something. So we've talked about acidity, how it cleanses the palate. When you add bubbles to the equation, that magnifies the acidity, it magnifies the cleansing ability. It's like that. I don't know if anyone remembers of the scrubbing bubbles ad. You know, champagne is like that. The bubbles actually scrape anything away from the palate from the last bite and awakens the palate so that it's a perfect way to start a meal. Bubbles make an average event special. So most people start with bubbles, and it is by far the most versatile of all wine beverages. And when I say that, it could, as you can see, when guests arrive, it's a great way to welcome people. It's perfect with appetizers. It's perfect, as you see here, between courses or anytime you like. Bubbles make an average time very good. So I think if you find them too dry or too tart or too acidic, keep plugging away at it because it's, I've been to many champagne dinners where there will be 6 different champagnes with 6 different courses and they all work. So I think that bubbles are a great way to start. If you go to a party at 7 o'clock at night and you haven't eaten since 1 in the afternoon, your palate is alert. Your palate is awake. And to get bubbles early on This really awakens the palate and prepares the palate for the next wine of the evening. So normally if there's 6 people, you all have a glass, it's not too much consumption. But I think that the bubbles are a great way to start. And we have a few of the categories here listed. So there's many more, but these are the big ones. And the daddy of all bubbles, of course, is Champagne. Now, Champagne is a geographical area in France that makes these wines with bubbles. The thing about Champagne, which may or may not exist in other parts of the bubbly world, is secondary fermentation, or the second fermentation occurs in the bottle that you're drinking. So this is one of the reasons that Champagne is pretty expensive. First of all, there's a worldwide demand for it. It's only about 84,000 acres in size. They're not adding geographically to it. So a lot of these people have come now to California and started planting and building facilities. The first one was Domaine Chandon, if anyone's been to Napa Valley. Chandon, Domaine Chandon, it's called there. It's the sister company to Moët Chandon, located in Épernay, France. So when we see California sparkling, they've oftentimes borrowed what the Champenois have done. So Champagne, those are expensive, again, because there's a worldwide demand for them. And secondly, there's a limited volume of production. So each Champagne house makes between 5 and 7 different levels. There's the Brut non-vintage, and then there's a Brut vintage, and then there's a demi-sec and a rosé and a tête de cuvée. So there's a lot of categories of Champagne, and you can end up spending a lot of money. So that's a special occasion beverage for a lot of people. But I think if you haven't had too much of it, crack a bottle open for Thanksgiving because your guests will appreciate it. It's only made from 3 different grape varieties, the Chardonnay, the Pinot Noir, and the Meunier. There are 4 more grapes allowed by law, but everyone talks about the big 3. So secondary fermentation occurs in the bottle that you will be drinking at your table. So California sparkling is just people in California. They're all over the state. They're making bubbles. Some of those are the French influenced ones, like Domaine Chandon, Domaine Carneros is owned by Tatange. Louis Roeder has Roeder Estate in Anderson Valley. So there's some great sparkling wines made in California today too. Cava is the term for Spanish sparkling wines that have done that second fermentation in the bottle. So this is one of the best values today in bubbles is Cava from Spain. And usually it's around the Penedès, around Barcelona areas where a lot of the big houses are located. And they're just huge volume producers. Prosecco has taken the world by surprise. They've been making it for over 120 years, but it's only been popular in America for probably the last 10, maybe 15, probably 15 years now. Prosecco is grown in Italy. It's produced in the Veneto, northeast Italy, in the Dolomite Mountains. And the grape variety for Prosecco is Glera, G-L-E-R-A. So Prosecco is 1/10 the price of some champagnes, but you're getting, that's making average evening better at a very beneficial price. So you will see the Italians have 2 classification levels. They have DOC, which most Prosecco is, but now there's a DOCG classification, which is Prosecco Superiore, you will still see on the label. So there's more choices, but those are the big 4. So please enjoy bubbles.
Thank you, Gordon. And so moving on to some of the heartier dishes of a Thanksgiving meal, there are some robust flavors, there's some hearty flavors, but we're not talking about, a T-bone steak, we're talking about turkey. And so when we think about red wine, we're really looking at lighter and more medium-bodied red wines. So can you just tell us, why do light and medium-bodied red wines work so well with some of these dishes that we see here?
Okay, good. Thank you, Logan. Again, you want to keep the meal in balance. Now, if you look at a traditional Thanksgiving, you've got 22 things on the table. So there's no way we want you to have just one wine with the stuffing. That's not what this graph is about. These are light and delicate wines which go with a lot of the things on the table. And one category in southern France is the Rhone Valley. In the southern Rhone area, it's Côtes du Rhône, slope of the Rhone River. And they make all three colors, red, white, and pink. Just easy drinking, low levels of tannin. You don't necessarily want a lot of tannin with some of these hearty dishes, but if it's there and you like tannin, drink it. There's nothing wrong with that. Beaujolais is the next area that we should talk about. The third Thursday in November, Beaujolais Nouveau comes out. Beaujolais Nouveau is the newest wine from the Beaujolais region, and it's celebratory. There's no aging, so it will be available the third Thursday in November at all of your favorite wine shops or liquor stores. So Beaujolais Nouveau is the non-aged, but the top of the line, you've all probably heard of Beaujolais Village, which is by far the largest category of Beaujolais wine. But Beaujolais Cru is something, there's only 10 villages in the Beaujolais region that have achieved the Cru status. Cru is a confusing word in French wine nomenclature, but in the Beaujolais region, it means a village. So there are 10 villages that have achieved Cru status. It means something different in Champagne, it means something in Burgundy, it means something different in Bordeaux. But in Cru, it's a village, and the Gamay is the grape variety. Grenache, very popular wine in lots of parts of the world, France for sure, America, and it's called Garnacha in Spain. Light, low levels of tannin, light color, almost a deep rosé, if you will. Pinot Noir is on fire in America today. If anyone saw the movie Sideways, that kind of propelled Pinot Noir to the next level. The epicenter, of course, is Burgundy, France, where it originated. Some plantings go back to the 1300s. Oregon is doing very well with Pinot Noir in the Willamette Valley. And of course, California does well, but it needs cool climate. Burgundy is a cool climate. Oregon is a cool climate. And California, it's only planted in the coastal regions like the Russian River, Anderson Valley down in Santa Barbara, although there's architectural breaks in the coastal mountain range that allows Pinot to grow in Southern California. Cool climate in a hot part of California. And then Zinfandel, that's America's grape. It does have a jammy characteristic to it, but its origins actually came from Italy, but California has really adopted it as our grape right now.
Thanks, Gordon. So moving on to green things, right? These vegetative sides, arugula, broccoli, spinach, green bean casserole. Herbaceous white wines tend to work well with those. Why is that?
Yeah, there are some organoleptic things in white wine that just, actually, some of these greens are hard to pair with, to be honest with you. But the Gruner Veltliner that you've got listed, these all work. I mean, so Albarino comes from Rías Baixas in Galicia in northern Spain. Albarino is very popular today. It's approaching a Chardonnay in characteristics, but it has this herbal style to it that works well with, and again, we're not saying don't go across the graph here and drink it with, arugula salad. It's all about mixing all of those together. Gruner Veltliner is something that works very well. It's an Austrian grape variety, the most widely planted grape in Austria. And Gruner has a style that works with green beans and asparagus and avocado. It's a very interesting grape variety, but if you haven't tried it, you don't find it everywhere, but it is Austria's most planted white grape variety. Pinot Brie, you may know this as Pinot Grigio in Italy, but the true name is Pinot Brie, which came from Alsace, France on the German border. And of course, Oregon needs to call their grape varieties by the true name. So in California, you will find some Pinot Gris and you will find some Pinot Grigio. In Oregon, it's going to be Pinot Brie. A little more body here than a Pinot Grigio for the most part, but again, works with some of these side dishes that It's trial and error though, please. Sancerre is extremely popular. It's made from the grape below. The Sauvignon Blanc is the grape used to make Sancerre. It's in the Loire Valley. The Loire Valley is about a 620-mile river that goes from Muscadet in the Atlantic, and then it goes all the way to central France and then turns downward. But Sancerre is where that turns downward. But 100% Sauvignon Blanc, very trendy today, and crisp, clean aromatics that work well with, again, these things we've listed for you. So Sauvignon Blanc, a lot of California and New Zealand, we name our wines after the principal grape variety. So New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, that's almost one word. Those 4 words together is almost one word today. Everyone wants New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. And of course, California does a marvelous job with it too. So, and you may find some California producer called Fumé Blanc. It's the same thing. Robert Mondavi and Ferrari Carano do that. But Sauvignon Blanc is what you're drinking.
Thank you. So moving to sweeter sides, cornbread, cranberry sauce, Clays Garrett's, they kind of tend to pair well with some aromatic white wines that might be a little on the sweeter side or a little on the more floral side. And wines like Lambrusco or different rosé varietals. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. Gewürztraminer does come from Alsace, is a little bit in Germany, but it's really a popular grape from Alsace. Spicy Traminer is what that means. Traminer is a village in northern Italy, but it's the spicy Traminer that works well. The most aromatic probably of all wines. In a blind tasting, you will always pick out the Gewürztraminer from 2 feet away from the glass. So if you're interested in aromatics, look at Gewürz. Lambrusco started out as a relatively sweet wine. It comes from Emilia-Romagna in central Italy, the food capital of Italy. So this was made sweet back in the 60s and 70s when maybe some of you had it. But now there's some serious owner-operators that are drying it up and making it more food friendly. So Lambrusco is it's the name of the wine and it's the name of the red grape. Riesling, I love Riesling. It's my favorite white grape variety. Germany on fire. It's been made for 900,000 years in Germany. Washington State, everyone thinks, well, Washington State, all the viticulture in Washington is on the east side of the Cascade Mountain Range. So on that east side, it's a desert. So they need the Columbia River to irrigate. And of course, Finger Lakes, that's what Logan is drinking tonight. Great part of America, great viticultural area with several of there are 9 Finger Lakes. How many are there?
11.
11, okay. So yeah, great Riesling coming out of there too. And it was pretty much started by
Dr. Constantine Frank.
Dr. Constantine Frank, thank you. Who came in the 50s, and he really brought the Riesling. It's a very cold climate, and Riesling does well there. The other thing that people love is, we put everything on one line here, but you could call them rosé. Rosé just means pink in the French language. They're called blush wines, or pink, or White Zinfandel itself. These wines look good on the table aesthetically and extremely popular. And please don't look down your nose at White Zinfandel. It's probably still a 30 million case category in America today. So you will find oftentimes a little bit of RS, residual sweetness, in the white Zins, but a lot of these other wines from Provence and France, they are bone dry and again, food friendly.
So speaking of sweeter things and residual sugar, we're going to move on to dessert and some traditional dessert wines, ice wine, port. Talk to us about these.
Certainly. So by the time the meal is done, your palate has been bombarded by probably in some cases hundreds of flavor profiles. So at the end of the meal, you need to eat something like these apple pies and chocolate mousse, whatever you have. You need a sweet wine to go with that, because a dry wine will get lost. It will camouflage the flavors that the desserts are looking for. Ice wine, Finger Lakes, Canada, Germany. This is a category where the grapes are harvested while frozen, hence the name ice wine. In Germany, it's EIS, ice vine. But in the Finger Lakes and Canada, you know, you see Inniskill, and there's some great names of ice wines, very sweet, very high levels of sugar. Which brings us to the next category. Anything in late harvest just means they were on the vine longer, so the sugar level in the grape increased. And Vidal is the other popular grape from the Finger Lakes region, and they make great late harvest wines. Moscato d'Asti, it's a Moscato grape. In Italian, we call it Muscat in parts of France. D from the village of Asti, which is Piedmont. This is slightly frizzant. It's not always totally, you know, very high in bubbles. It's just like a frizzante level or slight bubble activity in Moscato d'Asti. And then port works very well with chocolate, especially dark chocolate. Port comes from Portugal, very high in alcohol, very high in sugar. So it's going to make an impression on the palate at the end of the meal.
Thank you. So now we're going to just move on to some questions. There were a few that were pre-submitted, and then I will go through what's been coming in through the Q&A and through the chat. The first question I think is a really good one. I'm assuming that a lot of people here are preparing to host a Thanksgiving meal. Gordon, in your experience, what is the appropriate number of bottles to have for a party of 6?
Okay, very good question. And I've got to preface it by saying you must respect wine the way you would tequila or gin or vodka or cognac or anything else. It has alcohol. Ethyl alcohol is the component in wine. It's just not as much in wine, but you must respect it. So you got to watch quantity when you are going to a party and you're going to drive home. You just have to respect alcohol. But when you're in an environment, if there's 6 people there, you know, 4 bottles would be okay, 3 would be okay. If you're eating a lot and you're spending a lot of time there and you're having coffee at the end, that's a pretty good sequence to follow. But I would think, you know, you'd want to bring bubbles. If these are all good friends of yours, bring a bottle of bubbles first, have a white wine with the appetizer, have a red wine. If you're having steak or beef or something, or red pasta at the end. And then if you want to do a dessert wine, you have very small quantities of dessert wine. So 4 would be the max, I think. It depends on the tolerance and the amount of food you're having and over how much time you're there. So you got to respect alcohol.
So a few people have asked in the chat, what types of wines are there certain varietals that tend to age better than others? And then when storing that wine, what is the best way to do so?
Okay, good. First of all wines, not all wines, but the serious wines will mature. And primarily that is in the red wine category. So those of you that like Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon or Alexander Valley Cabernet Sauvignon or some of these producers in Walla Walla, Washington, Cabernets are absolutely a wine that will age, as will red Bordeaux. So if we look at Bordeaux, it's the largest fine wine producing area in France. And it is home to, depending upon what you read, but in the vicinity of 9,000 or 10,000 chateaus are based in Bordeaux. And the predominant grape variety is Cabernet Sauvignon for the most part. On the right bank, you will find more Merlot. But these wines are age-worthy. A wine will age if it has tannin. Tannin is that compound we talked about earlier, which comes from the grape skins, the seeds, the stems, and the oak barrels. This gives wine longevity along with the acidity that also exists in red wine. The other thing that aged very well is, we still on?
I'm still here, yep.
Okay, good. The other thing, port ages very, very well. That's very high alcohol, very high sugar. Both of those act as a preservative. Brunello di Montalcino from Tuscany ages very well. Barolo from Piemonte, Barbaresco, all of there's a lot of wines, a lot of dessert wines age very well. So back to your question, you got to look at something that has tannin levels or has something that's going to keep it in its youth, but you want to keep it in a relatively cool environment if you can, away from sunlight and vibration. I keep my cellar at 55 degrees, which some people, but that allows it to warm up a little bit when it hits the table. But you got to age it over time. If you, like I said earlier, if you want to buy 6 bottles or 12 bottles, 12 bottles is kind of heavy if you're experimenting, because you may taste it, oh, this is going to, you think it'll be good in 2 years, but it's usually related to tannin levels.
So we have a couple questions. Are there specific cheeses that pair well with wine?
Yes, there are. And again, that's a very individual feeling that people have. I mean, when you look at cheeses, you can find the soft cheeses, the triple cremes, camembert, brie. You can look at blue cheeses like Stilton, Roquefort, Gorgonzola. All these things play a different role, but everyone thinks that red wines work with cheese. And I'm going to interject here something that I found. In a gourmet dining situation, the cheese course is always served before the dessert. So you would usually have that entree wine, which is a Cabernet or Bordeaux or a Brunello or whatever you're drinking. That would be still some left over from the entree. So when they bring the cheese course, the common sense thing was, well, let's just continue with the red wine. But in actuality, a lot of these cheeses go well with white wine. So my thought to people that want to experiment with that is don't finish your appetizer white wine and wait till the cheese course comes out, and then go back and taste the white wine and see how they go with the triple cremes or the bries, whatever you're looking at. So I can't say that this works with this, but that's because when you go, if you get a cheese platter, it may have 3 to 5 cheeses on it, and you've got 1 glass of wine in front of you, you're just cross-tasting.
An interesting question here is the industry as a whole shifting away from oaky wines?
That's a very good question. Oaky wine is a term that we usually talk about Chardonnay. And 15 years ago, if you had an oaky wine or a wine that went through malolactic fermentation where you get some creaminess or butteriness to the wine, this would usually garner higher scores in a publication. It was more powerful. So, wow, I'm going to remember this wine. So that worked for a long time, but in recent years, a lot of winemakers have backed off oak. They want it, mine has oak in the background, but this is textbook Grand Cru White Burgundy. So you want oak, but I think in the background so that it works more completely with your courses. And it just, oakiness is too powerful on its own. So a lot of people have backed away. Now you will find oak in red wines because they may have primary fermentation in oak barrels, and they may age it in oak barrels for 24 months. So you will find oak in red wines, but when say, oh, that's an oaky wine, it's usually talking about, Chardonnay. You would not oak a Riesling because that would detract unless it's very old oak or seasoned oak, where it's just a container, not looking to impart any components of oak to the wine. So good question. Thank you.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I think this is a good one. It's something that people ask a lot. And that's, why does red wine tend to cause headaches? And then are there certain lighter bodied reds that might not cause headaches?
Okay. This is a question, and we probably will finish with this because I will not complicate it, but there's a lot to it. And first of all, a lot of people, when you look at a wine bottle, you will see contains sulfites. or sulfur dioxide, whatever you're seeing on the label. America has to put that on the label because asthmatics, allergy people may be allergic to sulfur dioxide. So a lot of people thought that SO2 created headaches, but it really isn't. I did a research paper on histamines. Red wine contains histamines. So those of you that are experiencing headaches from red wine, you may try an antihistamine before drinking the wine. The other part of that equation, in addition to the histamines that are in wine, and there's a big family of them, red wines also have tannins, which we talked about several times tonight. Red wines also have higher degrees of alcohol. A lot of red wines are 14.5, 15, sometimes 16% alcohol. That's going to give you a headache. So, and then wines also, they contain, when we say sugar, I'm not talking sweet, but carbohydrates. You know, there's carbohydrate in wine, and that's so essentially sugar. So sugar plus tannin actually dries out the body. So you need to hydrate. And you may find that hydration alone may reduce, you know, the headaches. And the other thing is, you know, white wines, the thing that can't make it sulfur dioxide is SO2 is higher levels in white wines, and people don't get headaches with the white wine. So we have to eliminate sulfur dioxide from the equation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your answers, and thank you for taking the time to speak with us all today. It has been, you know, as I said in the beginning of the conversation, I was really looking forward to this, and it has really been a treat for me. So I want to thank you, Gordon, for your time. I want to thank everybody that joined us this evening. There are still 65 of you on the call, which I think is amazing. So thank you everyone for watching.
Yes, thank
As
you.
always, this has been recorded. It will be shared on our YouTube, on the Susquehanna University YouTube channel, so you can go back and re-listen to the conversation. Our next alumni webinar will be in December. It's hosted by David German. He will be discussing kind of how to manage stress during the holidays, which again, I think is another really relevant topic. It's going to be a great conversation, and I hope that many of you will join that as well. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you again, Gordon. And I hope that you all have a really great evening.
Okay, thanks all for attending.